My name is Renee Dunn, and when I think about my childhood, the one thing that stands out is the overwhelming sense of being invisible. Growing up in Virginia Beach, everything in my family revolved around my older brother, Jace. He was always the golden child, good grades, the best schools, the car at 16. Me? I was the afterthought. When I needed help, it was always no. I watched as my parents handed Jace everything he wanted, and I had to fight tooth and nail for the smallest things. While Jace went to private school, I struggled through public school, working multiple jobs just to survive. I had never been the favorite. No one needed to tell me. I could see it in the way my parents looked at him, in the way they doted on him, while I was just expected to figure things out on my own. They were always proud of him, always praising him for every little thing he did. His grades, his achievements, his future, it all seemed to fall into place effortlessly. And me? Well, I was just the background noise. It started early. I'll never forget the day my parents handed Jace the keys to a used Ford Mustang when he turned 16. They couldn't stop talking about how proud they were of him. The car was a reward for keeping his grades up and helping out around the house. I stood there, looking at that shiny red Mustang, the one he revved to show off to the neighbors while I stood outside watching. It was my dream car, a distant fantasy, but I was stuck relying on the city bus to get to work, too proud to ask for their help. I worked at Sweet Waves Bakery down by the boardwalk, kneading dough from dawn until my arms ached just to save enough for a rusty bike I could find online. The bike wasn't much a Craigslist special with flat tires and a chain that slipped every few blocks, but it was mine, paid for with tips from tourists who barely looked up from their phones. I envied Jace, and I hated myself for it. It wasn't just the car, it was everything. The scholarships, the summers abroad, the internships, the life I would never have. My parents didn't get it. They didn't understand why I wasn't more grateful for what they'd done for me, or why I didn't want to follow in my father's footsteps and pursue a career in medicine. It didn't matter to them that I was working 2 jobs, juggling night shifts at the pharmacy while also taking out loans to cover college fees. It didn't matter that I was barely keeping my head above water. They couldn't see beyond the family mold they wanted to force me into. As I got older, the divide between Jace and me grew wider. Everything was always about him. When Jace scored a full ride to Virginia Tech, thanks to Dad's alumni connections and a fat donation to the engineering department, I couldn't help but feel my stomach twist in envy. I applied to the local community college because it was the only affordable option for me. There was no trust fund, no handouts, no free ride. I was stuck in the grind of endless hours at work, working double shifts just to make ends meet. Meanwhile, Jace was living the life I had always dreamed of. His dorm move-in day was like a celebration. My parents were all smiles, tears in their eyes as they loaded up his stuff into the Mustang, while I was left to scrape by, taking out loans that made my hands shake when I signed the papers. I felt abandoned. And not just by them. I was abandoned by a system that was never designed to lift people like me up. During that same year, my parents went all out for Jace's birthday. They threw a lavish party at our Virginia Beach home, inviting extended family, neighbors, and even some of Dad's colleagues from the hospital. The backyard was strung with lights, tables groaning under catered seafood and custom cakes. It was all for Jace to celebrate his new tech startup that my parents had funded. Jace stood there, surrounded by well-wishers and guests, talking about his plans for the future while I stood off to the side, nursing a soda, feeling like an intruder in my own house. Even then, Jace didn't have to worry. He didn't have to think about the sacrifices I was making or the choices I was forced to make in order to survive. My parents didn't see me. They didn't see the hours I worked, the loans I took out, the dreams I had buried under the weight of Jace's shadow. They didn't even try to understand my path or respect my choices. That night, as I stood in the shadows of the party, feeling smaller than ever, Mom pulled me aside. She whispered in my ear about how proud she was of Jace's ambition, subtly comparing it to my unstable career choices. My heart sank. She didn't even try to understand. She didn't even try to see me for who I was, an individual with my own dreams. She couldn't understand why I didn't want to follow the path they had set for me. The conversation that followed 2 nights later shattered something inside me. It was meant to be a routine dinner. Dad invited Jace and me over to discuss our future plans. But instead of a casual dinner, it quickly escalated into an intervention about my career. Dad had decided that I was on the wrong path. His voice rose as he told me that following his footsteps in cardiology was the only proven path. When I told him I wanted to work in tech, building something on my own, he didn't understand. His words echoed in my mind. You don't deserve any help from us if you won't follow the path we've set for you. Jace sat there, silent, his eyes avoiding mine. He wasn't involved in the conversation, but his silence spoke volumes. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations, under the weight of the person I wasn't allowed to be. I left that night, excusing myself before dessert was even served. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, packing a duffel bag full of clothes, grabbing my laptop, and leaving a simple note. I need space to build my life my way. By the time morning came, I had blocked their numbers, unfollowed them on social media, and deleted every family chat. Austin was calling me. I didn't know exactly how or why, but I knew it was where I needed to be. I was done being their second choice. I was done being their afterthought. The drive from Virginia Beach to Austin felt like a lifetime, but it was the most freeing feeling I'd ever experienced. The Atlantic Ocean was fading in the rearview mirror, and with every mile, I left behind the suffocating expectations of my parents and the life they wanted me to live. I didn't have much. My car was barely a step above a junker, and I had just enough savings to cover first month's rent on a small, one-bedroom apartment. But what I did have was a sense of freedom I'd never known before. For the first time, I was living for me. Austin, Texas, wasn't like Virginia Beach. The energy was different, there was a buzz in the air, an entrepreneurial spirit that was contagious. The tech scene here was growing fast, and I knew that if I could just make it through the first few months, I might be able to carve out a place for myself. When I arrived in Austin, I rented a tiny apartment in a complex near downtown. It wasn't much, a simple, modest place with chipped paint and old appliances, but it was mine. The walls were bare except for a single poster of code snippets, which served as my daily motivation. I could already picture my future, a future where I wasn't relying on my family or anyone else for validation. The isolation was hard at first. I spent days working from home, hustling to find remote coding gigs, sometimes not leaving the apartment for days. The loneliness hit me like a punch to the stomach. The quiet nights, the lack of any familiar voices, there were moments when I almost called my parents, when I almost gave in and went back. But every time I thought about it, I would remind myself that I wasn't doing this for them. This was for me. Austin's tech scene was competitive. There were hundreds of other coders, all vying for the same gigs, all trying to make it. But there was something about it that sparked a fire in me. Every rejection letter I received, every failed application, only pushed me harder. I couldn't afford to fail. There was no safety net this time, no fallback. It was do or die. I started networking. I joined online coding communities, attended meetups, and connected with people in the local startup scene. There were days when I felt like a fraud, pretending to know more than I did. But the more I immersed myself in the world, the more I realized that everyone was just trying to figure it out. But it wasn't just the work that kept me going. It was the small victories. The first time I signed a freelance contract, the first time I saw my name on a project, even if it was just a small part of a larger code base. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for someone who had never been given anything, those moments meant everything. By the time I hit my 25th birthday, I had made peace with the loneliness. I no longer sought approval from my family. They were a distant memory now, and I was starting to build something real for myself. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter they would never understand what it took for me to get here. Building my career in Austin wasn't without its challenges. I was constantly fighting the fear that I wasn't good enough, that my skills weren't on par with everyone else in the industry. I worked long hours, 16 hours some days, pushing myself past exhaustion to finish coding projects, create apps, and improve my skills. The burnout was real, but it was the price of success. I knew that if I wanted to make it, I had to sacrifice everything else. But despite the long hours, the exhaustion, and the constant doubt, there was one thing that kept me going. I was doing it for myself. There was no one to rely on but me. No one was going to hand me anything. I didn't have the luxury of family support or a trust fund, but what I had was determination, and that was something no one could take away from me. The isolation was still there, but it didn't sting as much. I filled the silence with podcasts and audiobooks about tech entrepreneurship, learning how to grow my business, how to find clients, how to scale. It was a slow process, but with every step forward, I felt more confident in my abilities. I started building a tech product, an AI-driven cardiology platform designed to help hospitals streamline the diagnosis of heart disease. It was a huge undertaking, and there were moments when I thought I was in over my head, but I kept going. Every line of code I wrote, every bug I fixed, felt like progress. It wasn't just about building a product anymore, it was about proving to myself that I could do it. I could succeed, and I could do it without anyone's help. The project was far from perfect. The early iterations failed miserably, crashing after just a few minutes of use. But failure was part of the process. I embraced it. It was all part of building something from the ground up. I didn't expect success right away, but I did expect to keep improving, no matter how many times I had to rewrite the code. Then, after months of hard work and countless sleepless nights, it happened. My first client, St. David's Medical Center in Austin, agreed to try out my product. They weren't sold immediately, but they liked the concept and agreed to run a trial with the AI platform in one of their outpatient departments. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I worked even harder, tweaking the platform, fixing bugs, and gathering feedback from their medical team. The AI had to process ECG data in real time, helping cardiologists detect heart problems earlier and more accurately. I knew I had a good product, but it needed to be perfect. I couldn't afford to let it fail. The pressure was immense. I would code all day, then spend late nights testing the product, iterating on the feedback, and sending follow-up emails to St. David's to see if they had any more suggestions. The pressure kept building, but so did my confidence. Every small success, every time the platform passed a test, was a step forward. But it was also a lesson in perseverance. I couldn't let setbacks stop me. I couldn't afford to fail. By the time I turned 26, my life in Austin had started to feel like a constant hustle, a race with no finish line. Every day felt like a new obstacle, a new challenge I had to overcome to make sure my dreams didn't slip away. The loneliness was still there, hanging over me like a cloud, but I pushed it aside. I knew I was building something bigger than just a company. I was building my future. Working from my cramped apartment, the only space I could afford, I began to see the cracks in the walls. The pressure to succeed, to keep pushing forward, was taking a toll. The isolation was beginning to feel unbearable again. I started to wonder if I was losing sight of who I was, if I was becoming a workaholic who lived and breathed nothing but the startup. I remember one particular night after I had spent 14 hours coding, testing, and troubleshooting my AI platform. I was exhausted, my eyes bloodshot from staring at the screen for too long. I sat back in my chair, a cup of half-finished coffee sitting cold beside me, and stared at the lines of code. Was this it? Was this the breakthrough I had been working toward? Or was it just another failure waiting to happen? I had built something that could change the world, but I was terrified that it wasn't good enough. I feared it would fall apart, just like all the times before, when I had given everything to something that ended up being a pipe dream. But then something shifted. I remembered the long drives across the country, the days spent questioning whether I'd made the right decision by leaving my family, by cutting myself off from everything I had ever known. I realized that no matter how tired or scared I wasn't going to let the doubts win. I wasn't going to let my past, the expectations, the failures, the rejection define me anymore. I refocused on my product, on the mission that had kept me going for so long. This was bigger than just coding, it was about making a real difference. My product wasn't just a business venture, it was a chance to prove that I could do something that mattered. That I wasn't just a mistake or a failure in my parents' eyes. I was a force to be reckoned with. That night, I went to bed exhausted, but with a new sense of purpose. I had a plan to fix the bugs, fine-tune the platform, and get St. David's Medical Center to sign on as a full client. I wasn't going to fail this time. But things didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. A few days after submitting the final product to St. David's, I got an email. It was from their tech team. They had run the platform through their tests, and it had failed. The system crashed under load. I felt the breath leave my body as I read the words over and over again. All my hard work, my sleepless nights, it had come to this. I wanted to give up. For the first time since I started, I considered walking away. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe my parents were right, and I was just a fool chasing a pipe dream. But then I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. I remembered the pain of watching Jay sail through life while I fought just to get noticed. I thought about the loneliness, the isolation, the years of rejection and dismissal. I wasn't going to give up now. I refused to be a failure. Not again. Not after everything I had already overcome. I called my mentor in the tech community, Jordan York, who had been through similar struggles herself. She listened patiently, and when I finished venting, she reminded me that failure was just part of the journey. You're going to fail, Renee, but it's what you do after the failure that matters. Those words stuck with me. I realized I had been looking at this all wrong. I wasn't failing, I was learning. The crash was a learning moment, not the end of the road. It was an opportunity to make the platform stronger, better, and more resilient. I spent the next several weeks fixing the bugs, rewriting sections of the code, and optimizing the system to handle the load. Every night, I worked until I couldn't keep my eyes open, only to wake up and start all over again. But I kept going. There was no other choice. After a month of intense work, I finally felt like I had nailed it. The platform was stable, responsive, and most importantly, ready for a real-world application. I sent the revised version back to St. David's, fully expecting more feedback and possibly another rejection. But this time, I was ready. A few days later, I received another email. We're impressed with the changes. Let's discuss a trial run. I couldn't believe it. It was finally happening. The trial run with St. David's Medical Center was a success. The AI platform was able to process ECG data faster and more accurately than any of the manual methods they had been using. They decided to move forward with the integration, and for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. My hard work had paid off, and my product was actually making a difference. But this was just the beginning. I knew that if I could win St. David's, I could win anyone. The victory gave me the confidence I needed to start pursuing bigger clients. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It was about building something that could scale, something that could help people. I wasn't just Renee, the girl who had left home and tried to make it on her own. I was Renee Dunn, the founder of a tech company that was about to change the way hospitals diagnosed heart disease. And that meant everything. With St. David's on board, I began reaching out to other hospitals, starting in the Austin area, but quickly expanding to other major cities. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. My platform was starting to gain traction. As word spread, I received more inquiries from medical centers, health organizations, and even venture capital firms interested in investing in my company. It wasn't easy. I faced constant hurdles, technology challenges, scaling issues, and even self-doubt. But with every challenge, I grew stronger, and my company became more resilient. Slowly but surely, I was building something sustainable. The AI platform wasn't just a project anymore. It was a business, and I was learning how to run it like one. By the time I turned 27, my company was officially a recognized player in the healthcare tech industry. We were now working with several hospitals, including a prestigious medical center in Houston, and I had secured my first round of seed funding from investors who saw the potential in my product. But the biggest shift came internally. I had gone from being the underdog, the girl who had no one in her corner, to being a leader in an industry I never thought I'd be part of. I had built something from nothing, and I was doing it on my own terms. As the momentum grew, I began to realize that I wasn't just building a business, I was building a legacy. My success wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about proving that anyone, no matter where they come from, could make it if they worked hard enough. And I was just getting started. As I settled into this new phase of my life, I began to realize just how much had changed. The walls of my small apartment, once a symbol of isolation, now seemed like the beginning of something much bigger. It was no longer just me against the world. It was my vision against the limits of what I'd been taught to believe was possible. I had already achieved more than I ever thought I could, and yet there was so much more to do. But this wasn't just about building a business anymore. This was about reshaping my future. My past was still there, lurking, trying to pull me back to the person I had been, a girl lost in the shadows of her family, struggling to make her voice heard. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had stepped into a new role, a new identity, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own family, take that away from me. Then, one day, just when I thought I had finally built a life beyond their reach, my mother called me. I had been ignoring their calls for over 2 years now, blocking them on every platform possible. But this time, there was no escaping it. The phone rang, and something inside me stirred. Maybe it was the sense of obligation. I still had deep down the part of me that had never truly let go of wanting their approval. Or maybe it was the thought that maybe, just maybe, they finally understood what I had done and why I had to leave. But I knew that whatever was coming, it wouldn't be easy. I picked up the phone. Renee, my mother's voice was shaky, not the same confident, assertive tone I remembered. I saw your house in Austin. I need to understand. How? How did you do this without us? The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. It was clear now that they were still caught in their own web of judgment and envy. They weren't asking how I was doing, how my life had been, or even if I was happy. They were asking how I had built a life that they didn't control, that they didn't dictate. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about them trying to reconnect with something they had lost their control over me. That conversation led to a meeting. A few days later, I agreed to meet my mother, father, and Jace at a coffee shop in downtown Austin. I was surprised they had traveled all the way here, but I was prepared. This wasn't going to be another apology tour, another we made a mistake session. I had worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me back into their lives, into their manipulative hold. They arrived, looking just as they always had, put together, polished, with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, but I could see it, the desperation, the need to make things right even if it wasn't in the way I wanted. My mother, looking exhausted, clutching a paper cup as if it was her lifeline, took the first seat at the table. Dad followed, loosening his tie as if trying to show me that he wasn't the same man I had left behind. Jace, ever the silent observer, took his seat across from me, carrying a folder full of documents that would soon reveal everything they had to say. They started by explaining their troubles. Dad talked about his malpractice investigation, about how he had lost his medical privileges, how his entire career had come crashing down. Mom chimed in about the collapse of her real estate career. Jace, to my surprise, spoke up about his failed startup and how his dreams had turned into a nightmare. I listened, not out of sympathy, but out of curiosity. The same family that had abandoned me for making my own choices was now asking for my help. They needed me to bail them out, to come to their rescue as they had always expected. They spoke of their problems, their downward spirals, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for them. I had been there before, trying to make them see my worth, trying to prove I was enough, and they had turned me away. Now, the tables had turned. When they finished their spiel, I set my coffee cup down. I didn't have the energy for small talk. You chose Jace, I said, my voice calm but firm. You made your decision years ago. You gave him everything. Now, you have to live with the consequences of those priorities. I could see the shock in their faces, but I wasn't done. I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. I'm not bailing you out. I built this life, this success on my own, and if you can't see that, then that's your problem, not mine. I've moved on. You need to, too. There was silence. For the first time, they didn't know what to say. Jace tried to speak, but his words were lost in the sudden weight of the room. My mother's face crumpled, tears slipping down her cheeks. But I wasn't moved. She had made her choice when she chose Jace over me, when she chose his dreams over mine. She couldn't ask for my help now, not after everything that had happened. Dad, for the first time, raised his voice. You've abandoned us, Renee. You're throwing us away when we need you the most. I stood up, not wanting to deal with their accusations anymore. You made me an afterthought my whole life, and now you expect me to come back and save you? I walked out of that coffee shop without looking back. Weeks passed, and the ripple effects of our confrontation continued. My parents' situation worsened. Dad lost his medical license entirely, his reputation in ruins. Mom's real estate agency went under, and she had to sell their family home at a loss to avoid bankruptcy. Jace's failed startup sent him spiraling deeper into debt, bouncing between temporary jobs and crashing with friends. I felt nothing but the weight of my own choices. This wasn't just about me cutting ties with them. This was about them finally facing the consequences of their actions, of choosing favorites and creating an environment where only one of us was allowed to succeed. It was painful, but it was necessary. As for me, I kept moving forward. My business grew, and I was finally beginning to see the fruits of all my labor. The company was flourishing. We had secured additional contracts with medical centers, and my AI platform was now being used in hospitals nationwide. I had found my calling, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my family, stand in my way. At 30, I felt like a different person. No longer bound by the weight of my family's expectations, I was free to make my own choices. The house in Westlake Hills, my new home, was the symbol of everything I had worked for. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress, a reminder that I had done it on my own. I also launched the Dunn Independent Scholarship Fund, dedicating part of my fortune to helping young people from backgrounds like mine, those who had no safety net, no fallback, but still had the drive to succeed. It felt good to give back, to know that my journey could inspire others to take the same leap I had. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about freedom. Freedom to live on my own terms. Freedom to make a difference, and freedom to choose who I wanted in my life. And as for my family, they were a part of my past, a part that I had to let go of in order to move forward.